You know how it is, right? Just another day in the neighborhood. I'm just your average Joe, living out my life in a nondescript suburban sprawl. Mornings start with a steaming cup of black coffee, a quick scan of the news, and a mumbled hello to the postman. The scent of freshly mowed lawns fills the air, and the days are punctuated by the laughter of kids playing in the street and the hum of traffic in the distance. My routine is as predictable as the ticking of a clock. The office, a quick lunch at the deli around the corner, and then back home to my trusty recliner and the evening news. And then there's my neighbor, a seemingly ordinary woman who lives alone in the house next door. She's quiet, keeps herself to herself most of the time. You'd see her pottering about in her garden or taking her little terrier for a walk around the block. Sometimes we'd exchange nods or a casual wave, nothing more. She's been living here for a good few years, I reckon. I don't know much about her, not really. I mean, she's not the type to pop over for a cup of sugar or a friendly chat. But she seemed harmless enough, just another face among the many in our little corner of the world. Opening. I started to notice something odd about my neighbor. You know how it goes? You see the same faces day in, day out, and you start to feel like you know them, even if you've never exchanged more than a few pleasantries. That was how it was with my neighbor. She was just a regular woman, always polite, if a bit reserved. But then things started to change. I'd see her at the weirdest times. 2 a.m, I'd glance out my window and there she'd be, just standing in her yard, staring at nothing, and then there were the noises. I'm not talking about the usual stuff like a loud TV or the sound of a vacuum cleaner. These were strange, like metal clanging against metal. It was as if she was moving heavy furniture around in the middle of the night. It didn't make any sense. Then she started to lose weight. I mean, she was never a big woman to begin with, but she became really thin, really fast. It was like she was wasting away right before my eyes. It wasn't just me who noticed either. Other neighbors started to talk. Whispers of concern floated around the neighborhood. I tried to brush it off. I mean, we all have our quirks, right? Maybe she was a night owl. Maybe she took up a new hobby that required a lot of heavy lifting. Maybe she was on some new diet. I didn't want to pry. It's not like we were close or anything. But then, one day, I saw her in her front yard. She was just standing there, not moving, her eyes vacant. She looked so frail, so lost. It was like she was there, but not really there, if you know what I mean. It was kind of unsettling. Closing. It was weird, but hey, who am I to judge? Then one day, the cops showed up. There was no sirens or flashing lights, just a couple of patrol cars pulling up outside the neighbor's house. I watched from my window, curiosity piqued. I mean, it's not every day you see cops in our quiet little neighborhood. As I watched, 2 officers got out of their cars. They were all serious faces and sharp gestures, which struck me as odd. I mean, sure, they're cops, but I figured they were probably just responding to a minor incident like a noise complaint or something. I remember leaning against the window frame, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind started to race, jumping from one possibility to another. Was it a burglary? That seemed unlikely. This was a safe neighborhood. Maybe someone had reported a suspicious person, or perhaps it was something to do with the neighbor's strange behavior I'd noticed lately. But I brushed these thoughts aside. I told myself this is probably just a routine check or something. The cops would ask a few questions, maybe take a look around, and then they'd be on their way. No big deal, right? As I continued to watch, I saw the officers knock on the neighbor's door. There was a brief pause, then the door opened. I couldn't see who it was that answered, but the officers went inside without hesitation. And that's when I felt a chill run down my spine. Something didn't feel right. The officers stayed in there for what felt like forever. I kept watching, waiting for them to come back out. But they didn't. And with each passing minute, my unease grew. This wasn't just a routine check. Something was wrong. And then finally they emerged, but they weren't alone. They were escorting someone out of the house, someone in handcuffs. I could hardly believe my eyes. I mean, who gets arrested in broad daylight in our quiet little neighborhood? I thought that was it. I was wrong. That's it. Something didn't sit right with me. I decided to do a little digging. I mean, I'm no Sherlock Holmes or anything, but I figured I could at least keep an eye out, right? So that's what I did. I started paying more attention to her house, to the comings and goings. It was weird, you know? She hardly ever left the house. I mean, I'm no social butterfly myself, but even I get out more than she did. And when she did leave, it was always quick, like she was running an errand or something. But even that was rare. Then there were the visitors. Now, I'm not one to judge. We all have our own circles, our own friends. But these folks, they were odd. Not the kind of people you'd expect a sweet old lady to hang out with. They were rough around the edges, and they always seemed to be in a hurry. It was like they didn't want to be seen. I started jotting down when these people would show up, what they looked like. I even tried to catch snippets of conversation when I could. It was mostly mumbles and whispers, but every now and then I'd catch something. Words like deal and supply. It was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was playing detective in my own living room. My coffee table was littered with scribbled notes, my binoculars always within reach. I was in this deep. I was obsessed. I couldn't stop. I was in over my head, but I couldn't stop now. There was something going on next door, something not right, and I was determined to find out what it was. Little did I know the truth was more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. But that's a story for another time. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. I remember it clear as day. It was a Wednesday, just like any other. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business when I heard the sirens. They were blaring, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. And they were close, too close. I rushed to the window and saw the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the street in an eerie glow. There were police cars, an ambulance, even a fire truck, and they were all parked in front of Mrs. Johnson's house. The next few hours were a blur. The street was cordoned off, men and women in uniform rushing around. The flashing lights, the hushed whispers. It was all too much. It felt like I was in some sort of nightmare, except I couldn't wake up. It wasn't until later that night, when a police officer finally came around to inform us, that I found out what happened. Mrs. Johnson, the sweet old lady who always had a smile on her face, who always waved hello as she watered her flowers, was dead, murdered, in her own home. And the worst part? The killer was someone we all knew, someone who lived right next door to her. It was Mr. Thompson, the quiet man who kept to himself, who never caused any trouble. But behind closed doors, he was a monster, fueled by drugs and madness. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. The truth, ugly and raw, staring me right in the face. Mrs. Johnson was gone, and the man responsible was someone we all thought we knew. I thought I knew my neighbors. I thought it was just an ordinary day. I was so wrong.